Hey everybody, I'm here to talk to you today about one of my former views. That is that the agricultural establishment and agricultural science, together with the pharmaceutical industry, academia, doctors, conspired all together to feed us garbage food which would make profits to elites at our expense, causing us to have poor health, but then being treated by doctors and the pharmaceutical industry, which would then profit off of our poor health, expropriate our health, as Ivan Illich put it, a man who wrote in the 70s on these issues. In this big system that conspired to make us sick and then make us pay for the medicines that would manage our symptoms but not treat the disease. This is my former view. Saying it, I can hear how crazy it sounds. It's totally crazy. But I believed this kind of thing, and this kind of view is extremely common in the alternative health community among people who promote alternative diets in order to promote human health, like keto, like many people who promote vegan diets. But there's one component in particular that almost all of these groups demonize because they represent to these groups this modern system of oppression by food and pharmaceuticals. And this one particular food is seed oils. Seed oils, in short, represent modernity. They're a modern invention. Although we have had seed oils in the past, actually going back thousands of years, even soy oil in Asia, sesame oil. The widespread availability and the fortification, as it were, of our food supply with these seed oils on the level at which it has occurred over the past 50 years is unprecedented. We are in a new world with respect to these foods that are put into ultra-processed foods as a fat source to make them more palatable, because if you add more calories, you make foods more palatable, you make people want to eat more of them. And they're relatively cheap. They're cheaper than butter, tallow, lard. And as a result, that's what we get. As I've said, this represents modernity, a centralized food system, centralized in as much as it's centralized around half a dozen to a dozen different major companies. And these companies control the food system, and these companies, of course, are also owned by and controlled by elites who reap handsome profits, which brings us to the next component of this, which is that these seed oils also represent inequality, elite concentration of power and of resources, of money, economic power, and economic inequality, which is alienated from the everyday person on the street. In contrast, the former source of fats in the past, for example, butter, lard, tallow is simply beef fat. These kinds of fats are decentralized. They're brought up, they're produced by people in their farms and not by elites in factories processing seeds. So there's a whole important social dimension of this which in and of itself drives a lot of the opposition to seed oils. They're newfangled. They represent modernity, the concentration and centralization of the food system. They represent inequality and elite power. And so all of these concerns, plus, their newfangledness, their alienness compared to foods from the past, all of these concerns clustered together have caused people, or have galvanized a movement of people in their opposition to these seed oils as a kind of countercultural or a kind of resistance against elite, centralized modern power. But this movement takes the form mainly of pseudoscience. So instead of voicing these concerns directly, these new foods represent things that we're alienated from. Instead, people invent pseudoscience to explain why they don't like these foods. In this video, I'm going to address some of that pseudoscience, in particular with respect to seed oils and melanoma, skin cancer, and also skin aging. Paul Saladino, also known as the Carnivore MD, who makes videos about how various accoutrements and different technologies that we use in the modern world may not be as healthy as we think that they are. And brushing teeth, for example, or wearing deodorant, or I think even wearing shoes, polyester. Anything that's modern, he thinks is bad. So obviously, seed oils are another one such thing. He encourages us to live ancestrally and not to wear shoes, deodorant, brush our teeth, eat seed oils, etc. And so he claims on Facebook, there's a Facebook post from, 2021, so last year, around the same time as now, so 1 year ago. He says, the sun will not cause wrinkles if your diet doesn't include garbage oils. And the garbage oils to him are, if you look back at the top of the post, seed oils to avoid corn, canola, sunflower, safflower, peanut, grapeseed, and soybean. So all seed oils. Again, so seed oils are the thing that causes skin aging and wrinkles, and it's not the sun. I'll show in a moment that this isn't the case. And he says here in this video, I hope you guys can hear this, the same thing. I will play the video now so you can see and hear it.
Skincare products if you want your skin to be healthy and you want to thrive, and you want to avoid sun and photo aging. Doesn't sun age us, Paul? No, it doesn't. I don't believe the sun is going to age you if you're eating the right foods. I don't believe humans generally need sunscreen.
I don't believe humans need sunscreen. I don't believe the sun ages you if you eat the right foods, if you don't eat seed oils. So we're now going to address this basic claim and many claims around it using the evidence that's available. Does the sun age you? Does it cause skin cancer? Is seed oils the cause of cancer? Is seed oils the cause of skin aging and of skin cancer? And clearly, based on the evidence I'm going to present, the answer is no. Paul was wrong. Here we go. First, the claim has been made that seed oils are causing an increase in the incidence and rate of melanoma. And to support this, these people who make this suggestion show a large increase in seed oil intake. Coincident with that, there is a large increase in melanoma diagnosis. Now, among people in the field of dermatology, it's been well understood that this increase in melanoma diagnosis is due to not an increase in actual melanoma, but simply due to an increased sensitivity of techniques with and screening procedures with respect to detecting things that are like melanoma or pre-melanoma or approximately melanoma that actually don't end up becoming true melanoma or truly invasive and dangerous. In other words, it's an overdiagnosis of things that look like melanoma or maybe are melanoma, but the body would have, if it hadn't been detected, dealt with these quasi-melanoma, as it were. It would have, the immune system would have shut them down. They wouldn't have escalated and become true melanoma, dangerous melanoma. Here's a paper by Gilbert Welch. He was a professor at Dartmouth. Benjamin Mazer and Adewale Adamson, called The Rapid Rise in Cutaneous Melanoma Diagnoses. As we can see from figure 1, the incidence of cutaneous melanoma is rapidly rising, whereas non-cutaneous melanoma is staying roughly the same, suggesting that something about cutaneous melanoma is different than non-cutaneous melanoma. It's easier to detect cutaneous melanoma than non-cutaneous melanoma. Non-cutaneous melanoma would be like melanoma in the eyes, for example. It's easier to detect cutaneous melanoma and screen for it. The implication is, therefore, that's why we're seeing more of it. Let's look at another figure. Here, let's look at the relationship between melanoma incidence and mortality, figure 4b. Here you can see that incidence of melanoma is going up, but mortality is staying the same, except for around 2015, 2016, 2017. We're seeing a drop in mortality around that time. That's related to immunotherapy. Immunotherapy works. It's a new kind of cancer therapy. But if incidence is going up, we would also expect for melanoma itself, the mortality to also go up, but it's not. Incidence of melanoma is going up dramatically, but mortality is staying the same. And interestingly, it's the same way with many cancers, not just melanoma. We're detecting many cancers at much higher incidence because of more sensitive screening, despite very similar mortality over time. Now here we can see in figure 3a, the increasing use of skin biopsies. We've had almost a doubling of skin biopsies from 2004 to 2017 among Medicare beneficiaries. Almost a doubling. Correspondingly, we've had almost a doubling of melanoma diagnoses. Likewise, the pathological thresholds have fallen, as you see in 3b, such that people are more inclined to diagnose things as melanoma instead of benign. And the interesting thing about melanoma diagnosis is there's no formal, strict cutoff for what constitutes melanoma diagnosis, which allows melanoma diagnosis to run riot. Because if there's no formal way of diagnosing it histopathologically on a slide where you look under the microscope, the rate can run riot. So the point of this paper is that melanoma diagnoses are going up not because of a real incidence of melanoma, but because of it's an artifact of increasing sensitivity and increasing screening that doesn't represent a real increase in actual melanoma. Okay. I'm going to find you guys another interesting figure. As I pointed out earlier, the rate of many cancers is going up, the incidence is going up, while the rate of deaths is staying the same. This is happening for prostate cancer. This is happening for thyroid cancer, melanoma, breast cancer, and kidney cancer. New diagnoses are going up, but deaths are not, suggesting we simply have more sophisticated tools and we are more vigilant about diagnosis, and we are finding cancers that aren't really going to be lethal cancers. And this is the reason why the rate of diagnoses is going up. Okay, and that is from a paper called Overdiagnosis in Cancer by Gilbert Welch and William C. Black, published in 2010 in the Journal of the National Cancer Institute. Okay, let's talk some more. So, people who say seed oils cause melanoma, they cause cancer, make the claim that seed oils are pro-inflammatory. So they cause an additional amount of inflammation on the skin when the sunlight strikes the skin. The problem with this is there's no evidence that seed oils are pro-inflammatory. On average. On average, they might be, in like half of people, they might be pro-inflammatory, half people, they might be anti-inflammatory. That's like the subject for another video. But on average, seed oils are not pro-inflammatory or anti-inflammatory. On average, they're about the same for everybody. So on average, they're not pro-inflammatory or anti-inflammatory. They're just neutral with respect to inflammation. Then this cannot be the mechanism of increasing inflammation due to sun exposure. It cannot be the mechanism since they're on average not inflammatory, anti-inflammatory, or pro-inflammatory. The next thing that needs to be said is that there's strong evidence that sunlight exposure does increase skin aging. It's not something that's made up by anybody. Nobody made this up. And it's not seed oils that are causing it. And to see that, check out a few posts that I recently made on Instagram, the Journal of Instagram. As we can see here, this post is about a 69-year-old truck driver whose left side of his face was exposed to far more sun over the years than his right side of his face. As you can see, the left side is weathered and leathery, whereas the right side is smooth. Even the eye looks different. The whole side of the face is dramatically different on one side compared to the other. That's because when the truck driver was driving, the sun was hitting one side of the face because of the routes that he was driving. I guess he drove the same routes over the years with the same sort of schedule. Or perhaps, probably more likely if you think about it, he's in the driver's seat. The driver's seat has a window right next to it, so it's very easy for light to get in, right? Whereas the passenger seat, there's a big roof over there, and light only comes in from a far way away, so there's going to be less exposure on the right side. So that's why, because he's always in the driver's seat, and light is very easily hitting his face. Okay, that's one bit of evidence, and here's a more dramatic piece of evidence, but it's less well controlled. Bad piece of evidence is very well controlled, but here's a less well controlled piece of evidence. Here's a 91-year-old Japanese monk who spent most of his life indoors. And his skin is quite smooth. And then there's a 62-year-old Native American woman who spent most of her life outdoors, and she looks like a leathery mummy almost. Okay, so if it's the seed oils, this picture and the woman was taken in 1905. If it's the seed oils, why is there seed oils? She's a Native American from 1905. There's no seed oils that she's consuming throughout her lifespan. It's not seed oils. Likewise, for the truck driver, it's not like one half of his face consumed seed oils and the other half didn't. No, he was next to his window. The sun hit his face more often on the left side than the right side. It wasn't that his left side of his face is eating seed oils and his right side was not. It's not seed oils that's causing this, it's the sun. Okay, so the sun contributes to skin aging. It also contributes to melanoma because it damages the skin in the same way. Not only does it damage the skin and cause it to become more wrinkly, it damages the skin and causes it to mutate and generate melanomas. And this is very clear by these two case studies, but in particular by the truck driver case study. It's indisputable. One can do some mental gymnastics to try to make it sound like, oh, well, if the truck driver had not been eating seed oils, even the left side of his face wouldn't have gotten wrinkled. But there's no evidence for that, as we're going to discuss in a moment. So here is a very interesting article called Association of Leisure Time Physical Activity with Risk of 26 Types of Cancer in 1.44 million adults by Moore et al. In the Journal of the American Medical Association, Internal Medicine. And the most interesting figure is this one, called Summary Multivariable Hazard Ratios for a Higher versus Lower Level of Leisure Time Activity, Physical Activity by Cancer Type. And it's showing if you're at the 90th percentile for physical activity versus the 10th percentile, what is your risk for various cancers? And this is a very striking figure. So for many, many cancers, there is a trend for reduced risk of cancer. For esophageal adenocarcinoma, it's almost a halving of risk. But for many, many cancers, it's like 20 to 30% reduction in risk, 10 to 30%, depending on the cancer. Most cancers, you see a reduction, and then a few of them you don't. But interestingly, prostate cancer and melanoma, malignant melanoma, you see an increase in risk. I don't know what causes the prostate cancer increase. We could speculate about that, and I think many people who are watching this might already have ideas. But malignant melanoma is striking because it's the only one, besides prostate cancer, you see an increase in risk, and it's a much, 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 much higher increase in risk, even than prostate cancer. Prostate cancer gives you about a 5% increase in risk, whereas melanoma, 27% increase in risk. It's the only cancer that is increased by physical activity. The only cancer, besides prostate cancer, that's increased by physical activity. This is interesting because one would expect that healthy lifestyle would protect from melanoma, like the other cancers. But in fact, despite the potential protection one might get from physical activity with respect to melanoma risk, the additional sunlight in people who get all of that physical activity is actually increasing your risk of melanoma. It's a very striking figure, and one that people would do well to pay attention to. Furthermore, there is a paper called Exposure to Indoor Tanning Without Burning and Melanoma Risk by Sunburn History by Vogel et al. also published in the Journal of the National Cancer Institute. The first line of the abstract says, indoor tanning is carcinogenic to humans. Individuals report that they tan indoors before planning to be in the sun to prevent sunburns. But whether skin cancer is subsequently reduced is unknown. So is just tanning indoors okay, even if you avoid sunburn? What they found is that those who tanned indoors without burning compared to those who never tanned indoors, the risk was fourfold higher of melanoma among people who tanned versus people who did not tan. Fourfold higher increase in incidence of melanoma, even among those people who do not experience burns from tanning, showing that's not just burning that causes melanoma, but also just tanning, and that this is probably causal. It's probably not the seed oils. But let's look at the studies that actually look at different intakes of seed oils and plasma concentrations of seed oils, so concentrations of seed oils in the blood, and comparing that to risk of cancer and of melanoma. Here is a one study from 2013 called Plasma Omega-3 and Omega-6 Concentrations and Risk of Cutaneous Basal and Squamous Cell Carcinomas in Australian Adults by Wallingford et al. This is not about melanoma, this is about basal and squamous cell carcinomas. But what they showed was an inverse association of both omega-3 and omega-6 in the blood and risk of skin cancers. They also showed linoleic acid, an inverse relationship between linoleic acid concentrations in the blood and risk of skin cancers. Meaning, the more seed oil type oils, type fats you had in the blood, the lower the risk of skin cancer. Not melanoma, but other skin cancers. Okay? So in fact, according to this associational study, the more seed oils you have, the lower your risk of skin cancer. Could not be clearer than that. But let's look at this other paper called the Omega-6 Polyunsaturated Fatty Acids and Risk of Cancer, accumulating evidence from prospective studies. In a dose-response analysis, a 2 and 3% decrease in the risk of cancer was observed with a 5% increase in blood levels of omega-6 polyunsaturated fatty acids and linoleic acid, respectively. It says, evidence from prospective studies indicated that intake of omega-6 polyunsaturated fatty acids was not associated with risk of cancer, but blood levels were associated with, inversely, with the risk of cancer. So higher blood levels lower the risk of cancer. And that's not just for skin cancer, that's all cancers. Okay? So that's our evidence. What I'm confused about is where these claims about seed oils and cancer actually come from. I talked about it at the beginning of the video. I explained it. It is the transmutation or the transmogrification of resentment and fear of modernity and of elites and of centralization, all that good stuff I talked about, into these strong feelings, into pseudoscience. That everybody knows seed oils are bad. Everybody's receptive to that idea. Seed oils, why would they be good? They're not normal. But it's important to note that many of the studies showing, for example, that ketogenic diets might be useful for lifespan extension in animals, etc. Those diets being fed to those animals are not natural either. Sometimes things that are not natural can be healthy. And there's a reason that this is maybe the case for seed oils. In fact, humans have a long evolutionary history of exposure to omega-6 fatty acids, including through nuts and seeds. It's not something that's especially new. The oils themselves may be somewhat new, but not the exposure to these polyunsaturated fatty acids in whole foods. It's quite old, in fact, ancient. It goes back to our hunter-gatherer days. So that's one reason why these oils may not be harmful for humans, despite them being new, because in some ways they're not. Okay, so I hope this video explained a lot to you. I know that there was a lot of information that I presented. I tried to combine it into a story, into a way of explaining how it all fits together. And I think I did. But I think the ultimate conclusion is that there's no evidence that seed oils are responsible for skin aging due to sunlight, unlike what some people say. And that we can be safe in consuming these, and there's no evidence that suggests that we can't be. Now that said, am I recommending that people eat more seed oils? No, I'm not. I'm not saying you should go out of your way to eat seed oils. I'm not saying you should add them to your diet. Eating more nuts and seeds is good. That's a healthy approach. If you want to eat more nuts and seeds, there's only evidence suggesting that that might be a good thing. But I'm not saying to go out of your way to eat seed oils. What I'm saying is you can't ascribe seed oils the role that it's being given. Seed oils are being given. You can't ascribe to them that role based on the evidence that we have. It's not supported by anything. It's essentially invented. Hope that was helpful for you. If it was, subscribe, click subscribe at the bottom. Like the video. Write a comment saying algo, saying anything, write anything, random noise in the comments. Let me know how I'm doing. If I'm doing a good or bad job, that's very helpful. But let me know in a constructive manner. Follow me on social media at Kevin Nbass, KevinNBass at TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, as well as Patreon. If you want to support me on Patreon, that'd be much appreciated. Follow me on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, at The Kevin Bass Show. Leave a review and a rating for the podcast. That would also be much appreciated. Find me on YouTube at The Kevin Bass Show or at KBass Philadelphia in the search bar. And share this episode with your friends, your family, the people you know on social media. That would be a great help to me. Tag me if you do that so that I know it's being shared. And I'll retweet you or I'll reshare you. And I know I would much appreciate if you did that. And with that said, after you click subscribe so you can get updates to future videos, and or follow on the podcast app if you're listening on the podcast app. After you do that, I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.